now look to Baroness Falkner to close the debate for the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's been a fantastically fascinating evening. Before I set out my argument, I want to speak to the Chinese in this room. I want you to remember two things tonight as you listen to this debate. Just remember that you couldn't have this debate in these circumstances in China. The other thing I want you to remember, as you vote with your feet to signal your agreement or your dissent with the proposition, is that you could not vote in China. Coming to the proposition, the question, I'd like to proceed for a little while. I didn't see where that came from, but I'd like to just stick to my arguments for a little while. China is a great power. It's quite rightly rising at a dramatic pace. I'm digging out my phone so I can see the time. It's rising, and the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how will its rise play out? Will it be a great, prosperous and benign giant in its neighborhood, leading global norms, develop multilaterally? Will it discharge the responsibility towards stability in the international system, which great power status demands? Or alternatively, will it be a catalyst for a major conflict, as predicted in the Thucydides trap? For those of you who've read the Peloponnesian Wars, you'll know that that's when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling one, and the most likely outcome of that is war. The problem is that we can't know its intentions other than to look at its past behavior, and that doesn't fill us with confidence. I was sorry to hear people say tonight what a force for good it is and how it does no harm. If you take people's actions by their past actions, then we should not forget the tens of millions dead in the Great Leap Forward, in the Cultural Revolution, and in the repression that China has practiced against its own people for the 70 years that it's been a revolutionary state. As Mark Twain is reputed to have said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Sup with a long spoon. As we know from the 20th century, rising powers can destabilize the international system. And the current international system is out of step with Chinese interests. China talks of peaceful development. Incidentally, the leadership changed that expression. It used to be called peaceful rise, but they realized that was a contradiction in terms of its militarization. If you're Japanese, Taiwanese, South Korean, Vietnamese, Filipino, or even Hong Kongese, you will sleep less well at night since Mr. Xi Jinping came to power than since 2012. It's instructive to look at how many Asian countries are allies of China. Nobody's trying, as other speakers have said, that nobody's trying to keep China out of the room. Nobody's trying to deny China a place at the table. The point is that we need to be clear about what China's intentions are. China's allies, in its own region, where you would expect it to be surrounded by friends because of its enormous power, are, wait for it, North Korea, Pakistan, and Myanmar under the generals. What does that tell you about how it coheres to your values? One of the problems with China's foreign policy, it is deliberately enigmatic. Its three main preoccupations are unifications with Taiwan, which feeds Chinese nationalism, a historic distrust of Japan, and above all, a fear of the American presence in the region. I argue that the fear of the American presence in the region is not just because the US is a superpower and that China is a rising superpower, but its antagonism towards the US is based very directly through the US's very existence as a free, liberal, democratic nation. The question is whether China fits into the international order. Is it likely to be a responsible great power upholding the international order? When China engages with the international system, it does so on the basis of a Westphalian view of state sovereignty. Normally, that the ruler chooses how he rules in his own land. It's the principle of non-interference that it claims to practice. The most obvious repudiation of Westphalia is, of course, the principle of liberal humanitarian intervention, R2P. China used its Security Council membership to actively render the concept of R2P meaningless, adding caveats and clauses such as, and listen to this, the need for the host country, that's murdering its own citizens, by the way, the need for the host country to agree to the intervention. They must have been really duped that night. It is in the end why we were not able to do nothing about the carnage in Syria. It is in the end why we will be able to do nothing about future carnages, whether they come from the West or the East. So we should be very concerned if China and Russia were to replace the West as global hegemons. But China is no principal observer when it comes to other matters of the UN. It has bought votes on the UN Human Rights Council, where it's been a member almost continuously. It vetoed condemnation of Syria in 2012. It was pro-Iran when oil and dual-use technology were in play, and it's always pro-Palestine. But yet it claims it doesn't interfere in the domestic affairs of other countries. And what of China's adherence to international law and multilateralism? It's moving from being a rule taker to being a rule maker. But when it makes its rules, they're a flagrant violation of our norms. Take the 9-dash line. It asserts control over virtually the whole of the South China Sea, and it's adding today other dashes to the line to extend the map to the East China Sea. Having agreed to arbitration with its dispute over the Spratly Paracel Islands in the Philippines, when the International Court of Justice ruled against China's claims, what did China do? It said it would never accept the ruling of the International Court of Justice, one of the organs that it signed up to when it became a member of the United Nations. I'll take your point. Do I get additional time? No, I don't. So quick.
The United States has also flagrantly disobeyed the rulings of the ICJ, so it's a bit rich to criticize China alone.
Sure, but I'm not here speaking about the United States' impact on the world overseas. I'm here tonight speaking about China. I stick to my brief. What of its peaceful development? Its string of pearls strategy aimed at securing harbors for its navy in the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean. Its Belt and Road strategy that Linda spoke about, that I'm not meant to name people, that the academics have spoken about in terms of what a positive development it is. Let me tell the House about one country involved in the Belt and Road strategy, Pakistan. China is giving it $60 billion of, we don't know what kind of assistance. What we do know is that the countries, some of the most unsavory countries that this project will cover, have no right to disclose the deals that China is making with them to their national parliaments, to have any scrutiny. Their sovereignty is being robbed of them, and above all, the Pakistan story, where China will have the right to sweep in from the north, right across to its deep water port in the south of Pakistan, could lead to serious destabilization between India and Pakistan, both nuclear powers. China's military ambitions are very well known, and they should make its neighbors, as well as its more distant neighbors, extremely nervous because they're not transparent. Most countries detail their military ambitions and their strategy in white papers, defense papers. China does not do so with any clarity. So to conclude, what do we make of China's impact overseas? It's a powerful rising hard power without allies. It has little soft power or traction in terms of its model of governance or its example-setting role. It's a threat to others through its instrumentalism and its hindrance of international law. Most importantly, it's a large and powerful giant ruling without the legitimacy and consent of its own people. A male gerontocracy prone to levels of secrecy which can only be suspect. China is no reliable or responsible global player. When it miscalculates, we will all be harmed. Thank you.